welcome to yet another episode of the Yellow Gloves podcast. Got a really special one today because it's the final card of 2024. Cage Warriors 182 in San Diego, a card that delivered nothing but extreme carnage, something that we've come to expect from Cage Warriors, but really this night delivered some pure insanity. 9 fights, 9 finishes. A few topics I want to discuss around the whole San Diego setup for Cage Warriors, but generally we're going to start as we mean to go, as we always do, work our way through the card. It's going to be a quick one today purely because 9 finishes and a lot of first round finishes, so there won't be a great deal to really tuck into in terms of the technical side and analyzing these fights. But we'll start with the main event: Damon Wilson versus Ryan Lilly. Ryan Lilly 12-10 coming into this fight, formerly seen on places like LFA, Bellator, making his Cage Warriors debut. Damon Wilson obviously needs no introduction. 7-2, 8 of his fights have been in Cage Warriors, so he's become a serious veteran really over the last few years, and I guess like a stalwart of the San Diego scene. And I think it was just, if anything was cool from this card, it was seeing Damon Wilson in a main event spot. We've seen him have some tricky fights. We saw him lose to John De Jesus. We saw him lose to Tobias Harila as well. But when he's on and when he wins, he looks so good. And this fight was no different. First round knockout for Damon Wilson, entering as a very, very late nominee for my finish of the year with that insane sequence where he folds Lilly with the uppercut. Well, he lands the uppercut, folds him with some knees against the body, and then as Lilly is bent over, you know, looking like the fight's done, Damon Wilson just sends 3 or 4 successive knees to the dome. As always with Wilson, it's just pure violence, pure carnage. That's all this guy knows how to do. An awesome performer at 145 pounds. Someone that you could definitely see in title contention for Cage Warriors in the next 12 months. I think it's cool to always have that trump card like they did with Roberto Hernandez. And we talk about this a lot. I think it would be great to see so many of these fighters that we enjoy from the San Diego scene. Like, don't get me wrong, and we'll talk about this in just a bit, but some of these fights are of no consequence. We have a lot of guys who make their debuts and we never see them again. Guys we get excited about, like Magomed Baiduev earlier this year. I don't think we'll ever see him again, but he had an excellent performance over James Settle. So it is hard to sometimes get connected to the San Diego stuff. But where you have your constants, your Damon Wilsons, Anthony Orozco, Bobby Winther, Chase and Blair, Roberto Hernandez, these guys, I think, they're the guys that come to my mind immediately when I think of the San Diego scene. These are like the pillars of that scene. And it would be cool, and I'll keep saying it with all of these guys, it would be great to see them fighting regularly in the UK. I know Roscoe's had a couple, Chase and Blair's had some as well. It would just be cool to have as many of these guys. Roberto Hernandez obviously fought for the title in the UK. There's so many great fights for these guys against opponents of consequence, against opponents. Because, realistically, as amazing as this was for Damon Wilson, improving to 8-2, scoring another finish, Ryan Lilly is not in his league. And it would be much cooler to see Damon Wilson against other featherweights in Cage Warriors. And, before we tuck into the whole, what remains of the card, the other 8 fights, I'd love to just kind of unpack and pick at this question from J Middle Scheme on Twitter, who's one of the best follows for Cage Warriors stuff and has a great, we're always chatting via DM, and he's always got great fantasy matchmaking for Cage Warriors. But James asks, how do Cage Warriors make the US cards more hyped for the average fan? Bring over more UK fighters or create more stars in the US? I think that the easiest answer for this is, I don't think we'll ever see Cage Warriors taking fighters from the UK and flying them out to the US unless we have a US champion. I don't think it's financially viable for a promotion of Cage Warriors size to be flying guys out just to fight in the US. I think it makes more sense the other way round, where it might just be 1 or 2 guys who fly them to the UK. Guys are going to give you a top performance. Your Anthony Orozco's, your Chase and Blairs, they're always going to be explosive and give you something, as opposed to the other way around, where it might not be the most cost effective thing. Especially if there's gold on the line, it would be awesome. Like, if Damon Wilson were to be champ in the next year and a half, if Orozco were to be champ, okay, flying out a UK guy to the US would be sick. But I don't think we'll ever see that. In terms of like creating more stars in the US, I just don't think, again, I don't think it's possible. I think they've done a tremendous job finding Anthony Orozco, which, anyone who followed the amateur MMA scene, finding Anthony Orozco is not difficult. Like, he's been one of the hottest prospects, but really being able to build and help develop and foster this guy's career. Pretty much all of his fights have come under the Cage Warriors banner. And for me, we'll talk about him shortly and we're kind of skipping ahead, but for me, he's one of the best prospects in all of MMA. So they have done a great job at fostering and creating stars, so to speak. I don't think it's viable long term. A lot of these guys, because Cage Warriors might only get to San Diego once or twice a year, it's not always, the timelines don't always add up to be creating stars. And some of these guys are going to be going to LFA, going to be fighting on Uriah Faber's cards because it's California, and eventually making their way to the UFC. I don't think it's as sustainable as the UK in terms of creating stars. And how to create hype for these cards, I'm going to be real. Like, when a San Diego card comes along, if the names I mentioned aren't on the card, your Orozco's, Wilson, Blair, Roberto Hernandez, I I have little, even looking at this card, I had very little interest for this card. Aside from the guys that I really enjoy, there's not a great deal of interest. And granted, look, 9 fights, 9 finishes, one of the best cards of the year in terms of pure entertainment. Clearly, they're doing something right. But in terms of how to promote it, I just, obviously they have some, they clearly turn over a decent amount of money to be doing it, once or twice a year, and it works for the promotion, and fair enough. I don't think it's just ever going to have the hype that a standard UK or Rome, even like the Rome cards, piss all over the San Diego cards. And I think it's because a lot of the talent in the US has already been tapped up by other promotions. And, especially when you build it around California, you're kind of closing this circle to just this one specific area of the US. I guess what I mean is just that catchment area, right? Like, they're just looking at that San Diego scene. So obviously it is going to be hard to foster it. However, if you'd asked me 12 months ago, and I've been very critical on this podcast, if you'd asked me 12 months ago how I feel about the San Diego scene, I'd laugh and say I don't give a shit, right? One of the I think one of the first episodes I ever did of this podcast was titled "The Meme Card" because it was just a silly little card in San Diego. But look, they are creating talent and they are fostering talent and they are giving us exciting fighters to be hyped about. Um, but I don't think it will ever reach that UK, and it does feel like a bit of a fad and a bit of a gimmick. And we've seen Cage Warriors in the Middle East before. We've seen them do cards there, and there's always going to be like these places that they keep going to, and because it's financially viable and it makes sense, which is great. It keeps the promotion afloat. For a podcast that solely covers one promotion, it's good to know that they can do those things and branch out and build their brand stateside. But to answer that question, I guess you're never going to generate the same hype as the UK stuff, and I think that's just part of the course. It's going to not be enticing for a lot of people, but if they keep giving us the usual names, then there's always something of consequence and something to enjoy. But going back to that main event, Damon Wilson improving to 8-2, 9 fights in Cage Warriors, a bunch of finishes, a guy you love to root for, a guy that always gives us violence, always gives us entertainment. So happy to see him in the win column, and I think he's probably going to slowly start building towards a title run, in my opinion. In the co-main event, we had a catchweight bout between Dominico Salas and Anthony Orozco. Orozco making weight at 176 pounds. Fight was originally supposed to be a welterweight bout for Orozco. Salas coming in at 181 pounds. So this was a catchweight at 182 pounds. Salas 2-1 in MMA, 6-1 as an amateur, BKFC and LFA veteran, making his Cage Warriors debut. Orozco needs no introduction, man. 4-0 as a pro coming into this. One of the brightest welterweight prospects in MMA, not just Cage Warriors, like in all of MMA. Orozco he's sensational. 2 wins in 2024, and he turned that into 3, improving to 5-0, and just looking absolutely unstoppable with his first round finish of Dominico Salas. Salas was just tailor made for Orozco. I loved Orozco weaponizing his range early. Every time Salas wanted to press forward, Orozco was just cleaning him up with a jab, front kick, and just circling and circling. And Salas was just walking into range and just getting absolutely peppered. The check hook from Orozco was nice. The minute he started digging the hooks to the body, you knew the fight was close to ending. Orozco, yeah, was really just ripping nasty, nasty shit to the body. The stepping knee was insane, and that folded Salas. And then Orozco knew what to do, just following up with more assault to the body and getting that first round stoppage in really just over 60 seconds. Not a great deal to talk about there. Just one of those for Orozco where he's just chaining together these wins. He's winning in big ways, in impressive ways. He's doing it in the US. He's doing it in the UK. Orozco's a problem. And look, 12 months from now, Orozco might no longer be in Cage Warriors. I think he's an absolute shoe-in for UFC stardom in the future, whether it's Contender Series, whether it's whichever avenue. Orozco's the real deal. He's been the real deal. As an amateur, you can ask anyone who followed the amateur scene, the IMAF stuff as well, the great work that Orozco did in IMAF, and now he's doing it as a pro. This is someone that, in my opinion, is like if you had to draw a list of, let's say the top 5 prospects in Cage Warriors, I think you'd be hard pressed to not put Orozco. Orozco's either 1 or 2, in my opinion, and that just depends on where you put Luke Riley. I don't think that. I think those two are just like 1A and 1B, the best prospects that Cage Warriors have on their roster. Two guys that we know are going to get sacrificed to the UFC gods and will go on and have tremendous careers. I think Orozco is just he's just nailed. He's just a shoe-in to have a great MMA career. He's a fantastic wrestler. He hits hard. He can strike. He's confident. If you watch his interviews, you know he's got a cracking, amazing personality. So you know that once he starts getting given the mic in the UFC and stuff like that, he's gonna shine. But while he's in Cage Warriors, I think he's just gonna keep knocking fools out, and that's just par for the course for Orozco. Amazing performance once again, improves to 5-0. Raul Navarrete and Xavier Vines gave us the fight of the night in just one round. Navarrete, just for some context, 2-0 as a pro, Cage Warriors debut, has a pro win via omoplata, which is always cool to see. Xavier Vines, Cage Warriors vet, a super slick striker coming off a win against Diego Bigelow back in June. 3-2 as a pro, but someone who, yeah, like I said, is not afraid to wrestle, but is also a very slick kickboxer. This fight was brilliant for as long as it lasted. Vines' early doors just looked like he was going to batter Navarrete, and he really was. The minute the fight started, he just took Navarrete down, went straight into side control, started attacking the far side arm, stepped over into a Kimura, but Navarrete survived, and Vines managed to switch it, I think, to a belly down armbar. Some serious elbow flexibility from Navarrete to be able to escape and not get submitted in those early few exchanges on the ground. But then back on the feet, Vines just every time Vines decided to strike in combination, and I think if Vines goes back and watches this fight, he's probably going to kick himself because whenever he decided to strike in combination, i.e., stringing like 3 or 4 strikes together, he was clocking Navarrete, he was hurting Navarrete, he was backing Navarrete up. What managed to turn this fight back in Navarrete's favor was the fact that he managed to turn it into and I tweeted about this, like a you go, I go approach or rhythm to the fight where he managed to lull Vines into this, okay, I'm going to land a front kick, you're going to give something back. I'm going to land something, you're going to give something back. And Xavier Vines fights best when he's chaining things together, whether it strikes or he's striking to wrestle. When he got lulled into this back and forth of strikes, that's when Navarrete managed to turn the tide. And this was a serious comeback win because for half of the first round, Navarrete looked completely dead to rights. He looked like he was on the cusp of getting finished. But once Navarrete managed to turn the tides, he looked sensational. Front kick to the face was really nice. His kicking range was just brilliant. Landed, I think what changed the fight was that he landed this really nice check hook, and that I think that's what caused Vines to strike less in combination and try and be more patient and a bit more calculated about his approach. But every time that Navarrete landed, it started to hurt Vines. And then what led to the finish was a beautiful left hand from Navarrete. The right hand uppercut wobbled Vines, started swarming him, then dropped him with a massive right hook. And then, part of the cool part of the sequence for the finish was the fact that the round was almost over. Navarrete followed up with big shots on the ground. You think that, okay, Xavier Vines is probably going to get saved by the bell here. And then Navarrete sweeps the legs of Vines as he tries to build back to his feet, takes Vines' back with 10 seconds to go, locks up the rear naked choke, and draws the sub with about 2 or 3 seconds. An insane round. I don't do round of the year in my end of year awards, and maybe it's something I should look to do. And if I did, this would probably be round of the year. It would be definitely up there. Uh, Insane comeback win for Navarrete. He, like I said, looked dead to rights early, but found his range, landed his shots, and put Vines out. 3-0, and there were many guys who made their Cage Warriors debuts and looked very good on the night, and Navarrete's one of those. I really, really hope we see him again because, yeah, I think that the guy's just an absolute dog, and people like him will always put on exciting fights. So props to him. A shame to see Vines drop to 3-3. I think there's so much potential there for Vines. I think he does a lot of cool shit when he fights, but I think he just got lulled into a false sense of security here, and Navarrete just turned the tides like any good fighter would. So yeah, props to both guys. They put on a show, but Navarrete 3-0 now. Very excited to see what he does next. And keeping on with this theme of guys making their Cage Warriors debuts in impressive ways, Johnny Robles versus James Settle. This fight was one of my picks for, like, I guess, like the people's main event, right? James Settle is always exciting whether he wins or loses. He's always a fun guy to watch. I know Robles is a bit of a banger. Um, 7-3, riding a 3-fight win streak, only gone to the decision once. I knew that this was going to be fireworks. What I didn't expect was a knockout win in less than 30 seconds. Johnny Robles just straight up slumped James Settle with a disgusting, powerful right hand, clubbed Settle to the mat. You love to see a one-hitter quitter, a walk-off KO, and that's an insane way to make your Cage Warriors debut for Johnny Robles, who improves to 8-3. Again, guys, not a great deal to talk about here. Like, what more can you say about a sub 30-second knockout? It was unreal to see. James Settle was out clean. One of the finishes of the year. Again, I'm doing my end of year awards show over the next week or so, and I've already made my decisions on what's winning what category. But this card specifically didn't help with some of the finishes on it. It definitely made the list of nominees much larger. And I'm probably going to put together like a compilation at the end of the year with like all the best finishes, and probably just put that out there on Twitter and Instagram just to draw some attention towards some of the pure insanity we've seen this year. And speaking of pure insanity, Blake Perry versus Bobby Winther was the main card opener, and my pick for fight of the night before the card started. I thought this one was going to be a back and forth brawl between two guys who are hard as nails, hit hard, are fun grapplers. Blake Perry is a guy I've been following for a while because I remember watching his pro debut at Bellator, where he was fighting one of the Coopers. We all know, like Ray Cooper and the Cooper family, huge obviously in MMA. And he was fighting one of the young Coopers. I think Makoa Cooper was who he was fighting, and yeah, it was Makoa Cooper. And I remember Blake Perry just being this massive, massive underdog. And I remember the crowd being against him, and he was the biggest underdog win on the card. I think he was like plus 1,000 or some ridiculous line, like plus 900 maybe as an underdog. And Blake Perry won that fight, and I've been following him since. He had that moment where he went viral, where his nose was just pointing in a completely different direction than where it should be, and he was just asking for it to be put back into place so he could go and fight. Like these guys are scrappers, and Bobby Winther needs no introduction, right? We've seen him in Cage Warriors, we've seen him win, we've seen him lose. He's coming off a loss, coming into this fight. A really fun prospect at 170 pounds. For me, like, just such a slick grappler who also hits like a fucking truck. So this one was always going to be fun. And I expected a competitive back and forth fight. What I got, though, and what we all got, was a 1 round beatdown from Bobby Winther. Bobby Winther early, landing the big right hand. And it's not just that he was landing the right hand, but landing it partially and just using the momentum to tie up the overhook against the fence and start working for the takedown. Once he got Blake Perry down, the fight was practically over. I love the way that Winther attacks the singles, switches to the double, and that was enough to eventually get Perry down. Winther went straight into side control and started already wedging his shoulder under Perry's neck. Once Perry regained his guard, he was in half guard. And Winther was just, yeah, driving his shoulder into the neck of Perry, already starting to kind of attack that or at least threaten that arm triangle, which, spoiler alert, he went on to get a few minutes later. But what I love about Winther on the ground is when he gets people down, he's trying to hurt them and he's trying to finish them. I love that he stepped out of half guard, went into mount, got the gift wrap, and started punching away at Blake Perry's head. It was really just two different levels on the ground, and Winther was just levels, and levels above Blake Perry in this one. Just again, yeah, an absolute beatdown, like I said. But what I love about Winther as well, the way he attacked the head and arm out of mount, he wasn't even stepping off to the side. Like, let's talk about this finish because that head and arm choke, usually, you know, anyone, if you've grappled, blah, 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 head and arm choke, you can finish it without stepping off to the side if you've got an ungodly squeeze. But generally, you're applying that pressure and then you're stepping off to the side, allows your hips to go to the ground. Sometimes you can wedge your leg underneath their back if they're turning, and that stops them from being able to turn back into you because you've got a wedge there. And that's typically what people do. If you want a good example of it, go watch Rafael dos Anjos versus, or who is it against? Dare I Google and waste our time? I'm going to do it because it will bug me. You want to watch RDA versus. Oh, I'll find it, guys. I promise. I'm just waiting for Typology to load of my dog shit internet. RDA versus Kevin Lee. Yeah, you want to go watch RDA versus Kevin Lee. And go watch his arm triangle. And sorry, it's either Kevin Lee or Neil Magny. It's one of those two. He arm triangles one of those fools, but you'll see that he does this great thing, and it's probably in both fights actually. I can't remember which one I'm specifically referring to. It might be Kevin Lee, but like he always gets the arm triangle and he immediately just wedges his leg and wedges his knee underneath their back. And again, we're going off on a massive tangent, but it's just to say Bobby Winther did none of that, right? This is how crazy this guy's squeeze is, and his finishing sequence here is just unreal because he stays in that same position. He doesn't step off. He doesn't really do anything other than just really squeeze and drive all of that pressure and all of that shoulder pressure into Blake Perry. And within a few seconds, Blake Perry had been put to sleep. There was some seriously nasty ground pressure. Bobby Winther back in the win column. And for me, one of those guys that whenever there is a Cage Warriors San Diego card and he's on it, I'm always very excited to see him fight. So props to Bobby. Super happy to see him back in the win column. And I cannot wait to see what they do with him next. We'll rattle off the prelim fights now because they were quick and they were insane. And we had a lot of quick finishes. We'll start with the prelim headliner, which was between Steve Mora and Miguel Painbert. Both guys coming into this fight with a negative record. 4-5 for Mora, 3-4 for Painbert. Painbert, a Cage Warriors veteran, we've seen him before. Mora making his Cage Warriors debut. A very competitive fight. First round, and it's crazy that we're talking about rounds, right? Because this whole time we've been talking about people finishing in the first. So we do have a bit to talk about here. First round, really good from Steve Mora. Scored it to him. It looked like he was running Painbert over, especially to start the round. Insane. Some of the combinations he was landing, like jab to the body, then hook into the body, landing that massive hook back upstairs. Painbert was surviving on instinct. In round two, though, the tide started to turn a little bit, and I thought Painbert was stealing the round and was starting to look really good and starting to fluster Mora, and you could see Mora maybe slowing down a little bit, but I think it was just two scrappers just going at it, and it was always going to be just a back and forth competitive one. But what Mora did really well throughout the fight is the calf kicks and really targeting the lead leg of Painbert to the point where towards the end or halfway through the second round, Mora lands one calf kick that staggers Painbert and he immediately exposes it, clocks him with two big overhand rights. And then as Painbert tries to wrestle, he attacks the head standing, attacks the neck standing, I mean, and jumps to Gilly, which we love to see. We love a Gilly jump. We love a Gilly submission and draws the submission, draws the tap out of Miguel Painbert. A massive win for Steve Mora, improves to 5-5. Really fun scrap on this card. And, Again, another guy making his Cage Warriors debut in a very big way. Then we had a catchweight bout between two guys who we'd never seen before. Fernando Medina making his professional debut after a 4-1 amateur run. His only loss as an amateur was to the Cage Warriors adjacent Anthony De Silva, who most of you folks might not remember, but had one of the finishes of the year on the last Cage Warriors San Diego card. So definitely seek that out if you want to see some violence. David Morales also making his Cage Warriors debut with a pro record of 1-0. So two guys fairly well matched records wise, but not very well matched in the cage, it seemed, because Fernando Medina just looked outstanding, attacking the lead leg early, attacking the calf. Morales was trying to wrestle, but really being quite lazy with it, not really threatening Medina too much. And Medina did really well to attack the neck to allow him to reverse position, scoring his own double leg takedown as Morales was trying to get that single. Medina, I love that, even when he did eventually end up on his back, attacked the triangle and looked like he was probably going to be able to get that because he had the arm and you felt like potentially the submission's coming. But Morales did well to clear the legs. I think the weird thing for me of Morales was that Medina had his guard open for ages, like he was just playing with an open guard and just like trying to work. And Morales wasn't standing, he wasn't trying to pass, he was just content to just sit there on his knees in an open guard, which is always a recipe for disaster. Eventually, they managed to get back to their feet. Medina uses this. Well, I say eventually, it was actually brilliant. He used a really nice overhook to kind of truck Morales over and get back to his feet. On the feet, Morales again had this tendency in this fight to just keep snapping a front kick with no setup. And eventually it costs him. Medina clocks him with a brilliant right jab, lands the left over the top to drop his man, and the follow up shots were enough to draw the finish. An impressive pro debut from Medina, someone to keep an eye on. And I hope we definitely get to see him again on one of these San Diego cards because that was a really cool professional debut for him. Eric Cortez versus Mike Zindler. Again, two guys who we'd never seen before, which again is common with these Cage Warriors prelims, but sometimes we do find a few gems. Eric Cortez really impressed me here. 1-0 as a pro. Zindler, his opponent, making his pro debut, but 6-2 as an amateur with a really nasty submission game from some of the stuff I saw online. But his nasty submission game eventually bit him in the ass because Cortez was the one who scored the nasty submission in this fight. I loved the lead left hook from Cortez early. Zindler kept trying to wrestle but wasn't really setting it up. Eventually, Cortez clocked him a couple of times. You saw that the hand speed advantage was there, the power advantage was there for Cortez. Lands a big shot. Zindler shoots again with no setup, and Cortez immediately exposes that lazy shot with a beautiful anaconda choke setup and gets the submission early into round one. Just a Team Alpha Male special. You know these guys are always going to go out there. When you fight out of Team Alpha Male, and I believe they've changed their name to maybe Team Alpha, but whatever, we'll just continue calling them Team Alpha Male because I have too much attachment to the past and that's what I'm used to. But you know that those Team Alpha Male guys, they're always going to be, when you're under a guy like Uriah Faber, you're always going to be cognizant of when a neck is available or an arm is available, but specifically the neck. And I think Cortez did a brilliant job to expose it, find the anaconda choke, and improve to 2-0. Another amazing debut on this card. And so the last fight we'll talk about, which was coincidentally the first fight on the card, was between Joshua Simpson and Joshua Cervantes. So a battle of the Joshuas. I think for me, one of the biggest stories to come out of this card is actually Joshua Simpson. A lot of people will want to talk about finishes and will want to talk about the bigger names on the card, the Orozcos and the Damon Wilsons. Joshua Simpson making his pro debut here with a 7-4 amateur record. Cervantes 0-1 as a pro, but a 12 fight amateur career. So these guys, plenty of experience between them. I think, what is that, like 23 amateur fights between them. Joshua Simpson, guys, I don't like to jump the gun, but sometimes you can tell someone's very fucking good and are exceptional mixed martial artists. And Joshua Simpson, for me, comes out of this card as one of the stories of the card, a guy I'm immediately keen to follow. Because sometimes on these cards, and look, let's be real, Eric Cortez, amazing anaconda choke. Medina, amazing knockout. guys who made their debuts. Johnny Robles, amazing knockout as well, who we'd never seen before, and I'm very interested to see what they do next. But with Joshua Simpson, I'm interested to just see this guy's career unfold. I think he's just such a well, he just mixes the martial arts really well. Beautiful wrestling in this fight. He had a nice like duck under to attack the single, just doing things you don't usually see from people making their pro debuts. When they were swinging wildly and Cervantes was trying to take Simpson's head off, Simpson was just using that momentum and that unabashed aggression from his opponent to just cut to a double leg, passing straight into mount, suplexing his man in the first round as well, using the underhook as well to slam shots to the exposed body of his opponent. Joshua Simpson looked awesome in that first round. I scored it to him, and both on the ground and on the feet, he just looked sensational. In the second round, great attention to the body from Simpson, using this cracking roundhouse before diving in on the double again to complete his takedown. And he was just battering Cervantes on the ground, getting into good positions. And look, Cervantes did a great job of surviving and always clearing the hooks. Like whenever he felt that his back was going to be taken or anything like that, he was addressing the hooks really well and keeping himself safe on the ground. But Simpson was just running him over. And, continuing with that theme of Simpson doing great work on the ground, he lands a gorgeous knee to the body while his opponent is grounded and scores some follow up strikes. Eventually, the ref just had to step in. Cervantes was getting absolutely battered. A very impressive pro debut for Simpson. Not only did he get a finish like a lot of these other guys making their debuts did, but he looked special doing it. Sometimes a guy comes in, wins via 30-second KO. It looks good, it looks amazing, it's exciting, and you want to see more of that fighter, but you don't really get a flavor for what kind of fighter they are, how they look. Do they gas out? How do they look when there's adversity? To get a pro debut like this from Joshua Simpson, yeah, I mean, it's hard to stick your neck out and just say something when a guy's just won his first pro fight. 7-4 as an amateur, which is a really good amateur record. A lot of guys lose as amateurs, and it's normal, and that's where you want to lose and learn. Um, but I might just stick my neck out there, and I think Joshua Simpson is special and a special talent. And I really genuinely hope we get to see him again. And maybe he's another guy that Cage Warriors build up and foster into a really good talent. I think that there's a lot to come from this young man, and yeah, he just seems like someone that we should be following. So if you take anything from this card, the big fights, the fun, exciting KOs, 9 fights, 9 finishes, all the flash and all the pomp. If you take anything from this card aside from those things, take away Joshua Simpson's performance because yeah, I think this kid's going to go really really far in his career. And so that brings to an end 2024 for Cage Warriors. A really exciting year, a fun year. We had so many great fights, great title fights. We've seen people signed to the UFC, most recently Kennedy Freeman, who we called for on this podcast to get signed by the UFC after she won her title, and it's happened. We've seen so many people make that move. Guys in the UFC crushing it, like Oban Elliott, undefeated in the UFC, killing it on the mic, killing it in the cage, just doing great things. It's been a tremendous year. We've seen the return of George Hardwick. We've seen Harry get the belt and impress. And I'm not going to sit here and give a whole recap of the year because look, we got a whole end of year awards show that I'm very excited to do. It's going to be our third installment of the Yellow Gloves end of year awards show. So I hope people are looking forward to that. We're going to have some nominees as well, which I'll put out there. Pretty much already have my winners guaranteed for every category. If you've never listened to the end of year awards show, we award 4 categories. So effectively, we have a fighter of the year, a fight of the year, we have a newcomer of the year, and of course, last but not least, we have the finish of the year, where I combine knockouts and submissions. So I pissed off a lot of people last year when I had Harry Hardwick's insane rear naked choke submission, which annoyed people because people think finish of the year should be knockouts. But I combined the two because I'm not a pussy, guys. And there's a lot of people that do that. Oh, this is my knockout of the year, and this is my submission of the year. But they're both finishes. Put them together, the good shit will always rise to the top, whether it's a submission or it's a knockout. It will always rise to the top. And look, no spoilers, but it might be a submission again this year, guys. You know me, I love my grappling, but also I think the consensus best finish this year, the finish I've seen gone viral. I was on Instagram earlier this week and I saw a random MMA account like with and the showing this clip of this submission. And if you've you know what submission I'm referring to. I don't want to spoil it, but I'm pretty much giving it away. But anyways, it had over like 200k likes. It gone pretty viral outside of our usual circle. So I feel very confident with giving that specific submission finish of the year. But a little bit of a taster there of what we're going to do in the end of year awards show. But generally for Cage Warriors, ending with a bang, as they tend to do always, going out with a bang, going out with 9 finishes in 9 fights, always a great thing to see. But if you've enjoyed listening to this episode, if you've enjoyed listening to the Yellow Gloves podcast in 2024, please, as always, consider liking. If you're listening on YouTube, liking, leaving a comment, subscribing. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, you can write a review. We've only ever had one review on there. We've had quite a few like 5 stars, which is nice, and nothing below 5 stars. So thank you very much for that. But if you're listening there, give it a rating. If you're listening on Spotify, follow the podcast, give it a 5 star rating. And generally, look, if you're interacting with this, even if you're listening to it through Twitter when I plug it or through Instagram, drop me a message, share it, retweet it, do what you can to spread the podcast far and wide. What we do is really niche, but there's always people out there that we can target, and people who probably follow the scene but don't know that this exists. So if you can help in sharing it, if you enjoy it, please shout and scream about it. We'll be going into 2025. It will be our third full year doing this podcast, which is quite crazy to think. Feels like I started it only a few days ago. We've had our best year, most downloads we've seen. We've reached 20 different countries listening to the podcast, which is, again, very humbling as well. So thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you all in the end of your awards show.